think I'm going to be projecting a lot more now. Okay. Thank you for raising that to our attention. In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. This time of mourning is a complicated one where we are filled with powerful and meaningful and even joyful memories, but also the growing awareness of our loved one's absence. We begin our service this morning with a recitation of Psalms, linking Len Zoref's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel that he was so proud to be a part of, and to our Creator, to God. Mizmor LeDavid. Mi yagur ba'ohalecha, mi yishkon bahar kodshecha. Holech tamim ufoel tzedek, v'dover emet bilvavo. Lo ragal al leshono, lo asa l're'ehu ra'a, v'cherpa lo nosa al krovo. Nivze be'enav nim'as, ve'et yir'ei Adonai yechabed. Nishba l'hara v'lo yamir. Kaspo lo natan beneshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach, ose ele lo yimot leolam. From Psalm 15. Do we deserve to enter God's sanctuary? Can we merit a place in the presence of God? Live with integrity. Do what is right. Speak the truth without deceit. Have no slander upon your tongue. Do no evil to others. Do not mistreat your neighbor. Spurn a contemptible person, but honor those who revere Adonai. Never retract a promise once made, though it may bring you harm. Lend no money at unfair rates. Accept no bribe against the innocent. Make these deeds your own, and you shall stand firm forever. Our tradition begins with words from the Psalms. These poetic meditations on our relationships with our Creator and the world, the awareness that our time is fleeting. And they stress our greater values, the horizon that when we are at our best moments, we are able to keep our eyes upon as we move through the world. As we hear them, we often think of different elements of a person's life. They call for each of us different things to mind. And it's powerful this morning, especially, how so many of these signs of righteous living we can connect with Len's memory and the way he lived his life. And so too with some words from Psalm 18. Im chasid tit chasad ve'im tamim tit amam. With the loyal, God, you deal loyally, and with the blameless, blamelessly. Im navar tit barar ve'im ikesh tit batal. With the pure, you act purely, and with the perverse, you are wily. Ki ata am oni toshia ve'inaim ramot tashpil. God, it is you who deliver lowly folk, but haughty eyes you humble. Ki ata ta'ir neri arnai Elohai yagia hoshki. It is you, God, who lights my lamp. Adonai, my God, lights up my darkness. Ki v'cha arutz gedud uvelohai adaleg shur. With you I can rush a barrier. With my God I can scale a wall. Ha'el tamim darko imrat Adonai tzrufa magen hu l'chol hachosim bo. The way of God is perfect. The word of Adonai is pure. God is a shield to all who seek refuge. This morning, we're going to try to honor a beautiful life of 99 years and 11 months. Clearly, we don't have all the words. We'll do our best, and we're going to begin with his two daughters, first with Joan and then Carol.
I have a few words before Carol has a lot of words. But first, Mom wanted to make sure you knew Dad loved being Jewish. She repeated that over and over again. Second, she reminded us that her mother's nickname for Dad was Adel. She said for his sweetness. In Hebrew, Adel is noble. I'm not sure what Adel means, but that works too. More on sweet to come. My father was a man of few words and many stories. A few things about my father. We learned so much from him about being good, moral people. He had no problem delegating to his daughters. A favorite line was, "I'm not smart, I'm lazy." So many men of his generation were not sweet. Dad was sweet. I inherited a lot of traits from him. One in particular is that I have his exact nose. So he will always be with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Because I'm not the President of the United States, I will not look weak if I take a sip of water. A number of times, even though I'm a mere 10 years younger than him, 11, he should live and be well. Thank you, Joan, for going first, yet again, for blazing the trail, for plowing the path, for being a warm-up act, and for getting a laugh at my expense. I thank you. Pam and I were married in this room, and so it's a room of great sweetness for us. It will not be a room of sadness. This will be a room of sweetness. And when Rabbi Ben Gideon met with our family this week, he suggested that Joan and I confer in order to avoid repeating anecdotes and other memories of our father. I had been listening so attentively and patiently and respectfully to the rabbi's guidance about the funeral, but then I had to object. The stories that we tell are never new. Yet we tell them again and again. Every year at Pesach, during which my father's birthday often fell, his birthday is April 16th, and somewhere between Mom's birthday on March 29th and Dad's birthday on April 16th, there would be Pesach, except not this year. Not this year. We read the story of the Exodus from our Haggadah. We read that whoever enlarges on telling this story is praiseworthy. Noteworthy is the fact that there is no single Haggadah. Different groups of families and friends read from and then elaborate on different tellings, with new versions appearing every year. The plot doesn't change, but each new telling aspires to be praiseworthy. Each new telling enlarges the possibilities of how a story can be told. Likewise, it isn't possible to wear out a story about my father. The ways in which Joan or I tell these stories about our dad, stories with the same plot, enlarges them because each one of us is telling them in different ways, ones that reveal almost as much about us as they do about our dad. And besides, many of you spent time with our dad over the years. So you also know that Dad told many of his stories again and again. Right? So a show of hands, not really, this is rhetorical. The one about being marched in the wrong direction after landing in Italy during World War II. The one about Jewish troops being served a Passover meal by German waiters who were prisoners of war. In fact, I believe we fulfill a commandment by repeating these stories, the commandment that instructs us to honor our mother and father. Honor is a big word. It's a verb, it's a noun, it's an adjective. It was also the most cherished of goals for my father, to live honorably, to be an honorable person. My dad did many, many things well. He was a giant in the photo industry. Not bad for a boy from Borough Park coming from a family of very modest means. He could fidget with and repair just about anything in a photo lab or at his home or at our home. He even hit a hole-in-one on the golf course. I misspelled hole. I used W-H-O-L-E, but that's good too, wholeness, where he played a decent enough game for many years. The daughter of one of his beloved golf companions is here today, two of his. We got people who play golf. He, however, the thing he did better than any man I've known was to lead an honorable life. Joan mentioned how difficult this was for a man. I had a whole thing about this, but you covered it, so thank you. This was no small feat in a world in which decency and honorability are so frequently, so destructively and selfishly jettisoned in the pursuit of other goals. I witnessed my dad's extraordinary manner of being year after year, day after day, whether it was in the professional sphere during the decade plus that I worked for him, or in the 70 years that he was my father. He never confused being honorable with being perfect. They are nothing alike. For my dad, being honorable meant doing what you think is the right thing. If it turns out that you've made a mistake, acknowledge it and do your best to rectify it. Apologize if appropriate, and don't do it again. My dad was not perfect. Just ask my mother, who is very particular about how she likes things done. Particular is a respectful word. A few years ago, she even scolded Dad about the way in which he got out of bed in the morning, the way he shoved aside the sheets and blankets in a tangled mess. Len, look at the mess. Right? Am I right? I'm not exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. I need not provide other examples of the forbearance shown by each of them for the other, especially for most of the people in this room who got to see them in action at one point or another during the 74 years of their marriage. My dad could also be a pain in the tuchus. But today is not the day for my telling you how. Not today. But I wasn't shy about telling him, nor was Joan. It wasn't always easy to be his daughter, and it wasn't always easy for him to be my father. I had a rather turbulent adolescence. Turbulent, another one of those gentle words. Turbulent adolescence that he could not understand. I didn't understand it either. but he never closed the door on me while I was figuring it out. Instead of holding it against me, he focused on his pleasure in watching me thrive. This capacity for reveling in the achievements of others was not reserved for his children alone. I have observed many teachers who thrill in the achievements of their students, but I rarely saw this in the private sector. Business owners could be cutthroat. Not Dad. I worked with him in the world of photography for many years, with him in the lab, and prior to that as a professional writer, and frequently encountered Dad's competitors, clients, and suppliers. These folks repeatedly made a point of telling me about his honesty and generosity. They didn't have to do that. These were all older men, and they just didn't. That wasn't their thing, but they would introduce themselves. They would say, "You're Len's daughter," and they would tell me a story. If an owner of another lab, the competition in Manhattan, ran low on something, they knew that they could call Dad and borrow what they needed, even when it was for a big project that Dad had also bid on and lost. He never said no and instructed us to do the same. He expected the same in return from his competitors. Only once did another lab refuse to help us out, meaning they insisted that we pay them an ultra premium on a supply instead of replacing it when our own shipment arrived. I really remember this so well. They were pin-registered plastic slide mounts. You will never see those again. We had no choice but to pay, but an ugly die had been cast, and we never helped them again. My father was not pleased. Not only had this other lab done something stupid, they had done something shameful. My father was also one of the founders of an industry association, the Association of Professional Photo Labs, that hosted annual meetings for lab owners and managers. A centerpiece of these meetings were roundtables, where competitors discussed all manners of things, from technical challenges to financial equations. My father had a simple rule for these roundtables. As soon as a participant learned something new, they were required to offer up a solution that they'd found for an equally difficult problem. My father would always kick off these sessions with an anecdote of his own. A story that he loved to tell was about solving the problem of bacteria in photographic processing chemistry by pouring bottles of Listerine into the holding tanks. Simple yet brilliant. It was no wonder that Kodak often asked him to beta test new products, and that his alma mater, Rochester Institute of Technology, awarded him their very first ever Alumni of the Year award, and often invited him to speak to their students, whether in Rochester or at the lab. I could go on and on. I really am just getting warmed up, really. And I will. By telling stories, by listening stories, by remembering stories that were for a time forgotten. Stories that Joan and my mom and Pam and Roy and so many of you will also recall having heard. Each of us honoring my father by enlarging him in the retelling. And here's one more thing I want to share. I am so proud of him. So deeply, incredibly, profoundly proud of him. It is such an honor to be his daughter.
The primary mitzvah of Passover, of Pesach, in Hebrew is higarata lebincha, to teach your child the story, each and every generation, each and every year, because our relation to it changes as we grow and as our life circumstances change. So that's exactly the rabbinic mindset of telling and retelling and revisiting these sacred stories, which help us really understand them and relate to them. And I am only the beneficiary of hearing about Len through the memories and stories of those who loved him most. But I want to share first, before I begin, the words of Rabbi Lucas, who had a beautiful relationship with Len and Selma and who can speak from experience. And he wrote, Len was a prince among men. His and Selma's long association with this congregation was a source of great comfort and strength for him and a source of enormous pride for the community. He represented the very best of what a Jew could and should be. And like so many others, I loved Len Zoref, and my life was enriched by knowing him. He had a passion for photography, and Temple Beth Shalom was privileged to show his work in our museum a few times. It was always enlightening to see the world through Len's eyes. The world was a better place because he was here. There was something comforting in knowing Len was in the world, and his memory will most certainly endure as a blessing. I think for that we can all say amen. Now, speaking the other night with Selma and Joan and Carol and Pam and Roy, Len's love of being a Jew was palpable. And that was my charge this morning, is to make sure to really capture what I heard about his love of being a Jew. You know how every once in a while there's an email that goes around identifying every Jewish Nobel Prize winner? You knew that Len would be appreciating it and perhaps even sending it. He didn't just love his Jewishness, he loved being a Jew. And Selma, one of the first things she told me, that in a time, remember, when people often hid their Jewishness to get ahead. That's too light. It's not accurate. Not to get ahead, but to be treated as an equal. To have a spot, an opportunity. Jews in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s often had to hide their Jewishness, to change their name, to conceal it somehow so they could have the same opportunity as their neighbor. But that would never have occurred to Len. And Selma said he was the first young man she met who didn't drop his voice when he said he was a Jew. We can see his love of being a Jew in Selma in his home, with art and photographs, books, and beautiful ritual objects collected throughout. Those who attended Temple Beth Shalom knew his love through his regular attendance and participation in our community. And Len's love of being a Jew could be seen on an even deeper level by the way in which he lived his life, guided by some of Judaism's most sacred commitments, as we've heard, to kindness, to humility, to righteousness, and pride in himself and in tradition. The thoroughness and the depth of Len's Jewishness, as evident in the stories the family shared with me, reminded me of a well-known part of Psalm 34. Mi ha'ish hechafetz chaim. Who is the person who desires life? Ohev yamim lirot tov, who loves the opportunity of long days that he may see good. Nitzor l'shoncha mera, keeping their tongue from evil, Lusfatecha midaber mirma, and their lips from speaking guile. Sur mera v'aseh tov, bakesh shalom v'radfehu, departing from evil and do good, seeking peace and pursuing it. His humility. So who is the person who desires life? Loves many days that he may say good. Excuse me. For some reason, my watch is freaking out. I'm just taking it off. So who is the person who desires life? Loves many days that he may see good? The psalm speaks about the person who behaves in a manner guided by the long arc of life, guided by great moral and religious values, and not distracted by petty issues of the moment that the wise person recognizes will quickly pass. As we have heard, Len was deeply moral and righteous, truly seeing the humanity and the reflection of God's spark in the people he met. And as Joan said the other night, he provided us with a moral foundation for our lives. The story of the meeting, there's a little preamble I have to give before we get to the more serious parts, because I think they speak to Len's character in such a beautiful way. That Len and Selma met at a wedding of friends, and he came up to Selma towards the end and asked for her phone number so he could call her. She didn't know if it was real or not, but he called. And for his first date, he invited her out to go dancing, which anyone who knows Len would find strategically puzzling. Well, not only did Len get lost on the way and wouldn't ask for directions, but they found their way to the hotel, which also was kind of a double date with Chuck Schumer's parents, as it turned out. But they get to the hotel, and they're in a rooftop garden, and the music starts. Len asks Selma to dance, and they go out onto the floor. And Selma said she remembers asking herself, do I remember how to dance? Because it wasn't working. Right? He never thought those kinds of superficial details were important. I don't remember if it was Carol or Joan who said that, or maybe Lori. If you're having a good time, that's what matters, right? It takes a confidence in yourself, right, to go on your first date to something that you're really not good at. And, but Len was also a very righteous and morally grounded person. Right, his father-in-law Izzy, though not his father, they had a deep connection through Judaism, a love of Selma, and all the years that the Seder would be at Leonard and Selma's home. While Izzy was alive, Len would have Izzy lead the Seder, right, as a sign of kavod, of honor for his father-in-law, right? A sign of him, being guided by these moral values. The family is so proud that the photo lab was racially integrated decades before it was the norm. And that a black woman was right in the front. And when someone said to Len, people might not even come in or might walk away because of that. And his answer was, so they'll walk away. Let them. And he had an incredibly dedicated employee, Joe Delgado, who was so appreciative, not just of the job, of the work, but also of the path that Len demonstrated for him, one that he could try to mimic and to mirror. So we can see that Len had a foundation in these greater and so important values. But as I said, his pride in being Jewish was right up there at the top. And he so loved being it in a generous and expansive way. Even the last name, Zoref, which is a Hebrew name, he took pride in that. And we've heard the story about being in Italy and having an opportunity to have a Seder for soldiers. What better message than to have the German POWs be the waiters and to appreciate the moment. You know, Selma said that if the world were made up of Lens, it would be a beautiful and a moral place, which, as we heard, I think Carol added, maybe sloppy, but beautiful and moral. And he was what we might call a Verbrennte Zionist, which is not how Selma was raised. But in his youth, he was a member of Beitar, which was the revisionist Zionist organization, and would quote Jabotinsky at the time, someone to the right in the political discourse. And he would help smuggle weapons to through the sewers and the tunnels in Brooklyn to get them to the shipyard, to get on boats, to get to the land of Israel, to help the people defend themselves. And he got that love from his mother, from Sophie, who was a dominant and a leading member of her congregation. And Selma said she was very impressed with her mother-in-law because she had the same Jewish education as the men in the family. And that's a powerful message in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s or the 40s. There's kind of a great story about Len is that if you know Israeli artists, you might have heard of one called Agam. Okay, he's almost known just by his last name, and we might even have pieces around here from Agam. There's displays in Tel Aviv, in the cities of his work. And Agam was in the studio, apparently, and insistent, as Israelis might be, that it happened right now, that taking these pictures had to happen right now, and he was going to try to make it work. So when they're waiting in a moment, Len said, well, how about a sketch or something, you know? And so he did something for them, and Len had this nice piece of art from Agam, but I'm not sure, maybe, I don't know if he realized it was from such a famous artist, or if it just was like, it didn't matter that it was from such a famous artist. But when he brought it to Temple for it to be displayed, it made a different kind of impression, a very strong one. And their love of Israel from an early time, leading Len and Selma to visit more times than she can remember, at least 7 or 8, including in 1967, in 1973. They assured me that it wasn't them who caused the wars, but just happened to be that way. And Selma remembers how when they first got to Israel, or when they would go to different sites or places, how vividly they matched the descriptions he had given her when he himself had never been. That's how large the land of Israel lived in his mind, in his life, in his soul. So as we heard, there are two reasons for having this ceremony here in the chapel that makes it especially meaningful to the family. That Carol and Pam's wedding was here, performed by Rabbi Lucas 10 years ago, is one, and also that the Sandlers, for whom the room is named, were neighbors and close friends. Len was a humble giant, a righteous and a kind man who lived out some of our most important and foundational values so powerfully that those who knew him could not help but be impressed, and to see his life as a guide and a lesson. And so I want to close with these words again of Psalm 34, which captures so much of Len's character. Who is the man that desires life and loves many days, that he may say good, he may see good? Keep thy tongue from evil and thy lips from speaking guile. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Our job going forward from today is to take the lessons of Len's life and to try to embody them in ourselves in our own way, to keep his memory alive in our world and to thus bind his memory in the bindings of life. In a moment, Cantor is going to chant for us El Malei Rachamim, a prayer that captures that essence essentially, and first he's going to share a psalm with us as well.
Our rabbis were smart to leave us with a number of psalms that are appropriate for this moment, each one for its own flavor. The one that spoke to me for today is Psalm 121. And the reason it spoke to me is because of the words. It says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. And it just brought to mind that now when we will look up towards the heavens, we will see one more very bright star. That is that star of Len Zoref, who is now with God in heaven. So I'll recite it in Hebrew and then lead you, if you'd like to join me, in the English. Shilamalo אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם אדוני, עושה שמים וארץ. אל ייתן למוט רגלך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל. אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מקור רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צדקך ובואך. מעתה ועד עולם. A song of ascents. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot falter. Your guardian will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protection by your right side. By day the sun will not harm you, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. The Lord will guard your life. The Lord will guard your going and coming from now and forevermore. Please rise. El malei rachamim shochen bamromim hametzei menucha nechona al kanefei ashchiena b'malot kedoshim utehorim כזוהר הרקיע מסיירים לנשמת אריה בן גרשון וששה שהלך לעולמו בעבור שאנו מתפללים ביד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו לכן בעל הרחמים הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Zoref, Aryeh ben Gershon Sasha, who has gone to his world and for whose memory we all pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us say, Amen.
If you're not going to the cemetery but would like to be able to be with the family right after the burial and they return to the house, and so you would like to be able to go to the house, you should check in with Carol. Yeah.
This is why, Joan. The house is open, and for those of you who would like to go to the house and not the cemetery, you're free to do so now, and then join us for a meal. We should be back at the house by 2 o'clock, but you're welcome to go there at any time and hang out. The doors are open. Okay?
So those who are going to be going to the cemetery will be leaving shortly, and there'll be Shiva hours this afternoon, also Sunday through Wednesday, and Minyan Sunday through Wednesday at 7 p.m. at the house. That's available as information through our email, and if you have questions, you can ask either Cantor or myself. We can make sure you get the information that you need. But now we'll begin our procession.